think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, unfortunately. I was really looking for a budget that helped make this country a fairer country and to build a green economy. And I think the Chancellor, she missed some chances. The big thing that I and the Greens have been pushing for in the run-up to this budget was for her to make the tax system fairer. So to ask the really super rich, the multimillionaires and billionaires, those who can easily afford to pay a bit extra through a wealth tax to fund public services that we all benefit from. This is something that an increasing number of people, not just the Greens, have been pushing for. There was an open letter signed by 28 MPs a week or so ago. There's lots of different organisations backing it, including millionaires themselves. There's a group called the Patriotic Millionaires saying, please tax us more. I really think it's an idea whose time has come, but unfortunately it doesn't look like Rachel Reeves got the memo.
I mean, in terms of, so a nurse will pay a higher rate of tax than a millionaire. Is that what you're talking about? Or capital gains not being raised in line with income tax? Is that something you would have pushed for?
There's a number of ways in which our current tax system is unfair, and it seems to be designed to be unfair. So I was pleased to see Rachel Reeves has increased capital gains tax. That's something the Greens were pushing for as well, although she hasn't equalised it with income tax, which is what we were saying would be the best way of doing it. So at the moment, people who get most of their income from the sale of assets, so that is by definition the wealthy, those who are sitting in their armchair and the money's just rolling in, they're paying less tax than people who earn a living from going to work every day. I don't think that's fair. I think we should equalise those levels of tax rather than giving that big that big loophole to the super rich. And that would have been part of the story, and a wealth tax would have been the other part of the story. And, you know, I know that the Conservatives left the economy in a difficult state. And Rachel Reeves made that point 5 or 6 times, I think, in her speech. I don't know how many. And it's true. But she was making out as if there was no alternative. But actually, we are in one of the richest economies in the world still. We have a lot of wealth in our economy. The trouble is that it's unequally distributed. And so these changes to the tax system would have given her lots more options, could have raised tens of billions of pounds that she could have used to invest in public services. Instead, she talked about every government department needing to make 2% of cuts. She claimed that this budget was the end of austerity at the same time as saying that departments were going to have to cut their spending. Now, 2% doesn't sound like much, and if that was 2% from square one, I might not be so worried. But this is at the end of 14 consecutive years of cuts from the Conservative and coalition governments. All of these public services on which we all rely every day are already cut to the bone. There isn't any spare fat to trim. And so I am worried about the impact that'll have. And even where she made sort of positive pledges around funding to local government, I'll have to look at the detail, but it didn't sound like those numbers were really going to be enough to make a difference and really make up for the 14 years of cuts.
And of course, we did hear the announcement a couple of days ago that the £2 cap on bus fares will go up to £3. Would you describe that as a stealth tax?
I would, and it's a stealth tax on overwhelmingly lower income people. Around 20% of Brits don't have a car. And a lot of those are in the lower income brackets. In cities, it can often be higher than that. In my city of Bristol, in some of the inner city areas, it's around 50% of people don't have access to a car. I don't myself either. And so while Rachel Reeves has frozen fuel duty again, so that's a big subsidy to people who drive to work, she has increased bus fares by 50% overnight. That is not only bad for the environment because it discourages public transport and encourages driving, it's also bad for equality because it disadvantages those on the lowest incomes, and it's bad for our economy because the research shows that every £1 you invest in local bus services, you get £4.50 back in the economy. So even if you don't care about inequality in the environment, and I would hope that she does, on economy alone, it makes sense to invest in public transport and especially buses, and it was really disappointing to see Rachel Reeves get that, in my opinion, completely the wrong way around.
Then if you look today in terms of the adjustment of fiscal rules, the couple of tweaks that were done today and, you know, unlocking this new spending power, I mean, if we look ahead to, say, GB Energy, that's just gone through its third reading. Do you not want to give Labour a few of their flowers for that?
Yeah, I voted for Great British Energy at the third reading yesterday, and the loosening of the fiscal rules is something that the Greens have long been pressing Labour on. Their self-imposed fiscal straitjacket that they've insisted on all this time never made sense, and so it's good to see Rachel Reeves acknowledging that. I hope that she will use these new fiscal rules to, for example, bring the water companies into public ownership, because the government recently commissioned an independent study or investigation into what we're going to do to deal with the horrendous, disgusting scandal of sewage in our waterways. And yet when they commissioned that investigation, they explicitly said that it couldn't consider bringing the water companies back into public ownership, even though that's fairly obviously a big part of the solution, because since they've been privatised, they got themselves into loads of debt, these water companies, paying big dividends and bonuses out to their shareholders and CEOs and not investing in the infrastructure, which is why we're in the mess, literally and figuratively, that we are now. So the Greens are clear that privatisation experiment has failed. Let's bring the water companies back into public ownership. The new fiscal rules would make that, it pretty much dissolves the arguments against it, and it would pay off in the long run because we're not creaming off those profits to shareholders.
Just finally, a lot of younger voters tend to move towards the Green Party, and we heard, well, today and yesterday that the national living wage for 18-year-olds will increase. Would you as a party, would you have pushed for that to be levelled out, so 18-year-olds are earning the upper threshold?
Absolutely. We think that paying younger adults less on the minimum wage than everybody else is ageism, pure and simple. And while, yes, there are some younger adults who still live with their parents and so their living costs are less, there are some who don't. And frankly, the ones who don't have the parental safety net are the ones that most need that minimum wage to help them make ends meet. And so we would have the minimum wage or the living wage the same across all age brackets. And it is positive that it's increased, but we would have liked to have seen it across all age brackets. And also there are other policies that came in this budget that will harm those on lower incomes, like the increase in the bus fare cap. And so there were lots of examples where it felt like the Chancellor was giving with one hand but then taking away with another. Another example of that is on the NHS and healthcare. So she's increasing day-to-day funding for the NHS. I really welcome that. It's not quite to the level of funding that various independent health organisations said was necessary, but it's getting near there. But then on the other side, she's keeping the two-child benefit cap in place. She's keeping the means testing of winter fuel payment with a really low threshold that will still affect lots of low-income pensioners. Both of those policies will directly make children and the elderly sicker. It'll increase costs on the NHS and it'll counteract that funding that she's trying to put in. So some good stuff in there, but a lot of not joined up thinking and what felt like half-baked solutions.